it would be difficult. Why? 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 Because if you were Harry, you'd understand. He always seemed like a good guy. That's exactly why I never married an actress. I wouldn't want to see my wife kissing someone else. Kevin Costner, a towering symbol of Hollywood prestige and quiet authority, has just delivered a statement that sent shockwaves far beyond the red carpet. Spoken softly, yet weighted with consequence, his words are said to have struck directly at the center of Prince Harry's world, forcing him to reconsider loyalties, intentions, and long-held assumptions. From elite charity circles in California to murmurs drifting through royal hallways, this moment signals a shift, one that puts reputations, relationships, and carefully protected narratives at risk. So could this single revelation become the fracture that changes everything? A line drawn in Montecito. Few moments in modern celebrity culture feel as heavy as the one Kevin Costner created with only a handful of calm sentences. Delivered without anger or spectacle, his words landed with rare impact, carrying the weight of a man whose reputation was established long before social media outrage or brand partnerships ruled the industry. Costner, a Hollywood veteran known for restraint as much as influence, made it clear that Meghan Markle would not be attending his private charity event in Santa Barbara. What followed was not idle gossip, but a statement that reshaped conversations on both sides of the Atlantic. He didn't raise his voice or linger on the moment. He simply shut the door from a quiet studio overlooking the Pacific just days before his annual fundraiser. Costner responded to a casual question about the guest list. His answer stripped away comfort and illusion in a single breath. Meghan was not invited. Then came the explanation, delivered in the steady voice of someone careful with every word. He spoke of an unwanted personal advance, of firm boundaries, and of connections he wanted no part of. He distanced himself from scandals that have marked powerful figures, drawing a clear divide between his world and hers. Those comments rippled far beyond California. Within hours, digital shockwaves reached London, Washington, and every place where royal drama still carries emotional weight. This wasn't a tabloid leak or a nameless whisper. It was a direct statement from a man whose career spans decades of credibility. In Hollywood, that matters. When someone like Costner speaks without theatrics, the industry listens. The setting only deepened the symbolism. Santa Barbara and nearby Montecito are more than picturesque neighborhoods with ocean views and manicured estates. They represent an American elite built on discretion, legacy, and earned respect, a refuge for influential figures seeking distance from noise. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle understood that symbolism when they chose Montecito as their home. After leaving the UK in 2020, the move wasn't just about property, it was a declaration. They weren't merely relocating. They were attempting to rebrand themselves within a new social hierarchy, one blending celebrity, philanthropy, and power. Entry into that world required validation from those already established. Costner's annual charity event, once known as 1805, live before its rebrand, has long served as part of that validation process. Hosted in Santa Barbara, it merges Hollywood elegance with a serious mission, supporting the mental health and well-being of first responders, firefighters, paramedics, and law enforcement officers. The guest list reflects that purpose. Those invited are not just recognizable names. They are people trusted to bring credibility, financial support, and genuine commitment. For the Sussexes, an invitation would have meant far more than a networking opportunity. It would have confirmed their acceptance into a guarded inner circle of American influence, built on reputation rather than royal inheritance. That is why Costner's refusal carried such weight. It wasn't public drama designed for attention. It was a closed gate. What sharpened the moment was his reasoning. He didn't describe it as a misunderstanding or a conflict of schedules. He spoke of a personal boundary being crossed and made clear he had no desire to be tied to controversies still surrounding certain royal connections. In doing so, he placed responsibility where he believed it belonged, without embellishment, without apology. Hollywood understood immediately. This was a deliberate judgment from a man whose career has endured shifting trends, scandals, and industry upheaval. Costner's authority comes from consistency and time. He represents a kind of influence that doesn't depend on constant visibility. And when someone like that quietly steps away, others notice. Across the ocean, the consequences felt just as uneasy. The British monarchy has spent years trying to contain the damage from past scandals while projecting steadiness and control. Any fresh link to controversy threatens that fragile balance. Costner's remarks reopened discussions many believed were long buried, connecting modern celebrity culture with unresolved royal shadows. What followed has been described as a reckoning rooted in Santa Barbara, yet its impact stretches much further. It reveals the gap between being famous and truly belonging, between being granted access and being genuinely accepted. It shows how American elite circles function through unspoken codes that titles and media strategies cannot override. In the end, Costner did not accuse anyone, debate publicly, or launch a campaign. He stated his position and moved forward. That quiet certainty proved more powerful than outrage ever could. One clearly drawn, boundary-reshaped stories, challenged ambitions, and reminded everyone watching that some doors open only to those who understand the cost of crossing lines. And as those lines were crossed, unseen tension had already begun to gather, turning what should have been a celebration into something heavy with unease. When Hollywood politeness first began to crack, there was an odd atmosphere that year, something many guests sensed before a single speech was delivered or a camera flashed. By 2023, what should have been a seamless celebration instead carried a subtle strain that never fully disappeared. Those in attendance later said the discomfort was easy to feel, even if no one dared say it aloud. Smiles were exchanged, hands were shaken. Yet the arrangement felt staged, almost practiced rather than natural. Behind closed doors, the issue had less to do with friendship and more to do with business. William Morris Endeavor, known globally as WME, is one of the most powerful talent agencies in the industry. The agency had a clear interest in showcasing its biggest clients as equals, moving within the same elite spaces. On paper, the expectation was simple: top names should stand side by side. In reality, the pairing was uncomfortable from the beginning. Several people close to the event later claimed Costner was not receptive to the idea. By many accounts, he faced significant pressure to agree. The result was an appearance that looked flawless on camera, but felt stiff in person. Footage from that night shows Costner beside Prince Harry, composed but distant. His interactions with Meghan were short and formal, carefully measured. Smiles appeared when required, yet the warmth never reached their eyes. It felt less like a shared moment and more like a performance staged for cameras. What makes that 2023 appearance so significant is how sharply it contrasts with what came next. When the event returned in 2024, the dynamic had shifted entirely. Only Prince Harry attended, Meghan was missing, and whispers moved quickly through Santa Barbara's social circles. Publicly, illness was cited. Privately, another narrative began to form, one rooted in frustration. It happened a few weeks ago, early this month, here at our cottage. Unmet expectations. A disagreement over status, according to reports later, echoed by royal commentators such as Neil Sean. Meghan had hoped to take on a co-presenter role on stage. To her, this was no minor detail. It represented recognition, a position she believed matched her standing. The organizers, said to be acting under Costner's guidance, declined the request. Their answer was described as courteous but unyielding. When that door closed, Meghan reportedly chose not to attend at all. For many observers, this became a turning point. What may have been intended as a display of leverage or confidence instead created a different impression. Critics argued it conflicted with the spirit of the event, which centered on service rather than spotlight. Rather than elevating her image, the absence raised questions about motives and priorities. The quiet strain of 2023 had evolved into a visible divide. Yet the most striking development came later. By 2025, Costner appeared ready to draw a firm line. In an interview ahead of his charity event, he made a statement that stunned both Hollywood insiders and the public alike. It was not softened by vague language or hidden behind politeness. It was direct, intentional, and impossible to misinterpret. In an industry where disagreements are usually handled through discreet leaks and carefully polished statements, Costner's approach was unusual. After more than 4 decades in Hollywood, he knew the rules better than most, and chose to break them public. Relations experts quickly pointed out that such openness often signals the end of all private negotiations. When someone speaks that plainly, it usually means every quiet effort to resolve the matter has already failed. Psychologists who study public behavior added another dimension. They described the moment as a firm boundary drawn after prolonged pressure. Costner's words were not emotional or impulsive. They were deliberate, and they were final. He was protecting something deeply personal, his home, his charity, and the values tied to both. The message could not have been clearer. A certain type of fame, even when connected to royalty, was no longer welcome in his world. Looking back, the scattered moments form a larger pattern. The uneasy smiles in 2023, the noticeable absence in 2024, and the direct statement in 2025 all connect, even if they didn't unfold in perfect order. This wasn't a single clash, but a slow accumulation of tension shaped by expectations, power, and conflicting ideas of importance. No, it's been locked down. Yeah, this is the first time I've had a chance to see. What remains most revealing is not the gossip itself, but what it exposes about modern celebrity culture. Influence may open doors, but it can close them just as quickly. In this case, the polished image of unity failed to hide the fractures underneath. Eventually, those cracks became impossible to ignore, and when they did, one of Hollywood's most seasoned figures chose clarity over courtesy in doing so. Kevin Costner reminded everyone watching that not all alliances are meant to last, and that sometimes the strongest message is simply deciding who no longer has a seat at your table. So when someone quietly decides who no longer belongs at that table, what truly happened in that moment? What did Kevin Costner describe, and why did it change everything? She made an approach toward me. The sentence sounds calm, almost gentle, yet its weight is unmistakable. It suggests distance, discomfort, and a moment when an invisible boundary was crossed. When Costner later chose those words, he avoided spectacle while still making his rejection clear. Not harsh, not cruel, but firm enough to matter. That single line soon grew into something larger, echoing stories whispered for years inside Hollywood's closed rooms. The moment itself traces back to a charity event in 2023, set in an elegant space where soft music blended with polite laughter and glasses clinked late into the evening. Costner was there as a respected veteran, known not only for his long career, but also for fiercely protecting his private life. At first, conversations flowed easily. Film ideas were exchanged. Charitable projects were discussed. Introductions were made the way they always are at gatherings like this. Nothing seemed unusual on the surface, but according to those familiar with what followed, the tone shifted. Compliments began to accumulate, no longer sounding like casual praise, but something more deliberate. Talk of future collaborations drifted into suggestions that felt personal rather than professional. The line between career interest and personal closeness narrowed quickly. For Costner, a married man known for maintaining firm boundaries, the direction felt wrong. He didn't raise his voice or create a scene. Instead, he chose the quiet authority of stepping back, ending the interaction politely but unmistakably. In that moment, a line was drawn. What gave the incident greater weight was the context around it. Long before that night, similar stories had followed Meghan since her early acting days on Suits in the early 2000s. They rarely appeared in major headlines. Instead, they lived in anonymous posts, private conversations, and low voices shared at industry dinners. These accounts often described a driven actress who understood the value of access and knew how to seek it out. Hollywood, after all, runs on connections. Success depends on being noticed, remembered, and invited back. For many trying to break in, charm becomes a tool and ambition a form of survival. Supporters argue with some justification that such behavior is praised when it comes from men. Confidence is labeled leadership. Persistence becomes strength. Yet the recurring detail in these stories was not ambition alone, but discomfort. People spoke of encounters that felt too familiar, too fast, and oddly transactional, as if warmth came with expectations attached. Those stories took on new meaning once Meghan's status changed. A royal title carries a different kind of gravity, especially in an industry drawn to symbols of power. Doors that once opened slowly now seemed to swing wider. Around that time, the Sussexes signed a major deal with WME, a powerful agency known for shaping elite careers. The agreement was called historic, and with it came pressure. Agencies are paid to produce results, and large investments demand visible returns. Insiders suggest that this pressure may have led to carefully arranged meetings and introductions, placing established figures like Costner into situations they had never sought. For someone who values independence, that kind of orchestration can feel intrusive. Seen this way, Costner's response becomes more than a personal refusal. It becomes a statement. It reads as resistance to a system trying to force a connection that had not been earned. When Costner finally spoke, his words carried unusual weight, precisely because of how restrained they were. He didn't accuse. He didn't lay out every detail. He simply described what happened from his perspective. That simplicity turned years of quiet murmurs into something far harder to dismiss. A respected voice had, without decoration, confirmed that the discomfort others had hinted at was real. The reaction also revealed a deeper misunderstanding about how power truly works in Hollywood. Titles may draw attention, but they do not replace trust. Legacy in this world is built slowly, across decades, through consistency and respect. He's with a man named Donnie Wee Boy. Among the industry's most established figures, reputation outweighs novelty, and influence cannot be assumed. It has to be earned through conduct and time. In the end, this story is less about scandal than about boundaries. It shows how ambition can be interpreted differently depending on how it is presented, and how, even in an industry famous for excess, quiet refusal can speak the loudest. Costner's decision to step back, and later to speak carefully, reminded Hollywood of something it often forgets. Access is not entitlement, and respect is never automatic. So what happens when access is mistaken for entitlement? And how did one chilling line from Kevin Costner turn that private lesson into a moment echoing from Hollywood to Buckingham Palace? A single sentence that poisoned the well. There are moments when a few words carry the weight of 1,000 pages, and this was one of them. With a line that sounded more like it belonged in a dark novel than a public exchange, Costner cast a shadow stretching from Hollywood to Buckingham Palace. In a single breath, he placed the Duchess of Sussex beside the most radioactive name to ever touch modern royalty, binding her by association to a scandal that has already scarred the crown beyond repair. No evidence was presented, no explanation followed, yet the effect was immediate and severe. The power lay not in detail, but in proximity. The Epstein saga has long stood as a symbol of corrupted power, a grim story that crossed borders and pulled in figures from politics, finance, media, and royalty alike. It was never only about crimes hidden in private places. It was about how influence shielded itself for the British monarchy. That story has one lingering face. Prince Andrew's connection to Jeffrey Epstein has haunted the institution for years, becoming impossible to escape after his disastrous 2019 BBC Newsnight interview, his legal settlement with Virginia Giuffre in early 2022, and his swift removal from public duties marked a turning point. Yet even after he faded from public view, the stain remained, clinging to the monarchy like a ghost that refuses to leave the room. Behind palace walls, damage control became routine. Observers long noticed a strange rhythm in press coverage. When attention on Prince Andrew intensified, waves of negative stories about Prince Harry and Meghan often followed. Coincidence or strategy, the result was the same. Public focus shifted. Outrage scattered. The most dangerous questions lost momentum. This pattern fueled claims that the Sussexes had become a convenient distraction, absorbing pressure meant for a far more destructive scandal. Costner's statement shattered that fragile balance. By naming Andrew and Meghan in the same breath, he collapsed two separate crises into one toxic narrative. The walls that once kept those controversies apart suddenly fell. What had been managed through separation was now fused into a single darker picture, one that could no longer be neatly contained or redirected. Rumors linking Meghan to the Epstein world had existed for years, mostly buried in the furthest corners of the internet, unsupported and widely dismissed. Some whispered that her early Hollywood years placed her near elite social circles. Others claimed, without proof, that Ghislaine Maxwell had mentioned her privately. None of these stories crossed into credible reporting. They lacked sources, substance, and verification. On their own, they faded as quickly as they appeared. What changed was the messenger. Costner is not an anonymous voice behind a screen. He is a figure with decades of standing in the entertainment industry. Someone assumed to move within elite spaces, where information, gossip, and half-truths circulate freely. You didn't see fit to share this with me. His words did not create facts, but they revived old rumors, giving them a visibility they had never possessed before. In a world where Hollywood, wealth, and global influence overlap, even the suggestion of insider knowledge can be enough to ignite suspicion. For King Charles III, this moment strikes at the center of a fragile mission. Since taking the throne in 2022, after the long and turbulent final years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, his objective has been unmistakable. He has aimed for calm restraint and a streamlined monarchy capable of surviving. In a doubtful modern era, stability, not spectacle, was meant to define this chapter. Costner's words threatened to drag the institution back into the gutter, reviving the very disorder the new king hoped to bury. The palace now faces a dilemma with no clean escape. Any response from Meghan risks reopening the full record of Andrew's disgrace, pulling his past back into headlines across London, New York, and beyond. Silence, however, allows the association to settle and harden in the public imagination. The unspoken link between the king's brother and his estranged daughter-in-law becomes a slow poison, eroding the crown's claim to moral authority. This is not just another entry in a long list of scandals. It cuts deeper because it strikes at legitimacy itself. The monarchy survives on trust, tradition, and the belief that it stands above the darkest excesses of power. When names tied to exploitation and secrecy are spoken alongside those meant to symbolize renewal and change, that belief begins to fracture. Costner's sentence did not accuse, prove, or explain. It merely connected. And in doing so, it delivered a blow that years of careful image crafting may not be able to undo. Could a single unexpected voice, speaking far from palace walls, deal a strike so powerful that decades of reputation building suddenly began to unravel before the world? A crown under strain does not always break under open attack. Sometimes it trembles because of one unforeseen voice, heard far from the halls of power. That is how this story unfolds. Not in London, but across the ocean, where a television interview filmed in California sent a quiet wave of alarm through Buckingham Palace. What sounded to viewers like a casual exchange reportedly landed inside royal walls with deep unease, reviving fears the family believed they had pushed thousands of miles away. For years, the household worked carefully to keep distance between the institution and the Sussexes, convinced that whatever storms followed them were confined to life in the United States. That belief collapsed the moment the interview aired. A private worry became public once again. Worse still, it merged with other unresolved embarrassments the monarchy was already struggling to contain. Insiders whispered this was more than another headline. It was confirmation of long-held doubts about Meghan's judgment and the circles she moved within. At the center of the anxiety lies a question the monarchy avoids, unless forced to confront it. What happens when royal titles themselves become liabilities? Removing a title is not symbolic theater. It is a heavy constitutional step, bound to history, law, and precedent. The example, most often cited, dates back to 1917. During the height of World War I, when the Titles Deprivation Act was passed. That law allowed Parliament, with the monarch's approval, to strip titles from those who sided with Britain's enemies. The circumstances today are different, but the principle remains. Titles can be removed when actions are judged deeply damaging to the crown. This is no longer theoretical. In recent years, King Charles quietly approved steps to remove Prince Andrew's remaining styles and honors, setting a modern precedent for how scandal is handled within the family. The message was clear: patience has limits. According to well-placed sources, a similar file is now being compiled behind closed doors, this time focused on Meghan. Within that growing dossier, the comments from the California interview are said to carry particular weight. The man who spoke was not a tabloid provocateur or a bitter insider. He was Kevin Costner, wealthy, famous, and widely viewed as independent of royal politics. His claim that Meghan made an uninvited approach, alongside implications touching the Epstein controversy, carries influence precisely because of who he is. To palace strategists, testimony like that is dangerous. It is calm, credible, and difficult to brush aside. For King Charles, the situation opens a painful divide between duty and blood. Those close to him say he remains a father weighed down by sadness over his broken relationship with Prince Harry. Yet he is also a sovereign sworn to protect an institution meant to outlast personal feeling. Years of public criticism from the Sussexes have already thinned his patience, and many believe the latest developments pushed it to the edge. Prince William, by contrast, is said to view the crisis more coldly. As the future king, he reportedly sees continued controversy as a threat to the stability of his eventual reign. From that perspective, permanent separation appears less cruel and more necessary. Stability, after all, is the currency of monarchy. Still, constitutional experts warn that any move forward would be dangerous. Stripping titles would likely require a formal petition to Parliament, igniting fierce political debate and relentless media attention. Thank you. Nice to see you. Such a spectacle would be deeply unsettling for a monarchy built on restraint and tradition. There is also little doubt that Meghan would fight back, both in court and through public relations, turning the process into a long and bitter struggle. Yet public opinion appears to be shifting. In the United Kingdom, petitions calling for the removal of the Sussex titles have already gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures. What once seemed unthinkable is now discussed openly. Many believe Costner's words may mark the tipping point, the moment private concern transforms into decisive action. If that step were ever taken, it would signal a final and irreversible end to the Sussex chapter of royal life. For Harry, losing his birthright would mean total separation from family, heritage, and homeland. For the monarchy, it would feel like a painful confession of failure, yet possibly a necessary measure to ensure its own survival. What began as a simple interview in a California studio has grown into something far greater. A quiet question has become a reckoning, forcing the House of Windsor to face issues it hoped would never return. The whispers have grown louder, and truths long buried are pressing forward, demanding to be heard. So what do you think Kevin Costner revealed that has Harry questioning everything he once believed about Meghan? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.